Thanks for joining us for WJ Talk, brought to you by the Waterways Journal. Today we're taking a closer look at some viral videos making big claims about the Mississippi River and why they don't line up with the facts. We're talking with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers experts who work with river data every day, along with a technology specialist who explains how these videos were created and why they spread. The Waterways Journal has been covering inland waterways and the barge industry since 1887. Let's get started.
Good morning. It's February 6th, and this is the latest installment of WJ Talk, a regular series of conversations sponsored by the Waterways Journal, the oldest trade journal that has covered the barge industry since 1887. Our subject today is deepfake videos about the Mississippi River, and we're very fortunate to have some distinguished guests with us. Patrick Chambers is Chief of Operations and Regulatory Affairs at the Mississippi Valley Division. Is that correct? Joey Windham is Chief of the Watershed Division at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And Susan Olson is the founder of Action Intel, holder of 6 patents. You're a computer scientist PhD, or is that an engineering PhD, or both?
Aerospace and mechanical engineering.
Aerospace and mechanical engineering. But Action Intel uses artificial intelligence to aggregate data to create software products for the barge industry. So we have 3 highly qualified people, and we're here because of some videos that have been circulating around that I believe each of you got sent separately. Do you want to tell us about it? Was it the same video or was it different videos? Joey?
Yeah, so I've seen, I think, 3 different versions. So pretty much the same information, but different spins on them or different photographs that go with the voice. So I know there's at least 3.
Yeah, I've seen the same version multiple times, circulated for me from different people. So, but less copies than you all have seen. But the similar content, I think I've heard from some people, even this week at a fly-in DC, that were talking about reading it from somewhere as well. So I think there are, like you said, multiple versions floating around.
And tell us a little bit about these videos and the claims that they made.
Yeah, I could. So yeah, some of the claims were that we have plenty of rainfall through the last couple of years, which is, not the whole story. It's about when the rain comes. It's not, annual averages. It matters, what time of year, whether we're in low water or not. That was one of the things that was big. Some other claims were that we're losing water in the river, that we're not accounting for that, from Cairo, kind of the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi River, that the water that is there, we're not seeing in the lower river, like Baton Rouge, I think it uses. That was a big, claim there. Yeah, that was probably the 2 big things there, that we're losing water, was what the video was claiming.
And there were
not tracking.
Well, and there were also the claims that there was only 3 foot of water at Memphis, in the Mississippi River, which is horribly untrue, which does concern us, with the efforts that we do in order to keep commerce moving along the river. So
yeah, and unfortunately, I think it actually cited several government agencies as being in some sort of emergency study mode on this. And it cited, references to university professors that had credentials in geological engineering, which were all false. When it was first circulated to me, it was from, someone at a pretty large financial institution, and, it asked me if I was following it. And so I watched the video and then, recognized that through some of the slips in the audio that it was AI voiceover, and then just started, kind of doing a little credibility fact checking of, the individuals and things mentioned, and there was nothing, factual in it. It's really just a conglomeration of clips and videos that were existing in, from other relevant and credible publications put together with an incredible story, right? So I think that, one of the, if there is any silver lining out of that, by being so specific about things, it is pretty easily to verify that it's false. So, I think, but I still think, having things like that circulate, it's important to have you gentlemen on to talk about like what the agencies are actually doing and how things are actually managed. I think that, goes a long way to debunking, these problematic claims.
Was there anything, Pat and Joey, about the videos at first glance that leaped out at you as red flags, or did it seem plausible until you took a second look?
Well, I think initially, whenever I first started looking at it, probably the first minute and a half, I was like, well, having to listen real close. But then whenever they started showing like the video of one of our former commanders up in Memphis and making some claims that, that were, wildly untrue, that was kind of, one of the big tips. Of course, whenever I reached out to Mr. Windham to ask him his thoughts on this, he immediately recognized it as fake, because the water management piece, is what they were talking about. And he knew that was off immediately.
Yeah, and they were taking just some public meetings we've had that are scheduled meetings that are for studies or things like that, planned meetings. And they were labeling those as emergency meetings, and then go to a clip that shows a group of people behind a window with, private meeting and stuff like that to make it look like it was some kind of emergency meeting that we were losing water. But it was obviously just a scheduled meeting they had taken a picture of or found a picture online of also.
Well, when I looked at the videos, I noticed that it appealed to conspiracy type thinking and, here's what they don't want you to know. But you guys are completely transparent with all the information you have, correct? You're putting it out there every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Joey does a great job with the water management piece. And of course, we interact with industry on a continual basis, especially whenever we go into low water periods. Whenever it does get a little bit challenging, we've got a lot of dredges out there working. We coordinate with them at least twice a week, sometimes more, specifically identifying problem areas, through surveys and their input for us to go out and dredge.
Yeah, all of our water control data that we take is publicly available. We use that to analyze, but all that data is there. All of our operations of projects and things like that, very transparent with it. And because that's what we do, to make, the more we can make that available, that's helpful to shipping industry and everyone that, is tied to it.
I've noticed too that, the interagency collaboration, like with gauges and sensors and those sort of things, is really effective. Like you can also go and see USGS flow gauges, right, that have CFS. So you can look at flow rates at different points on the river. Those sorts of things can be, you don't need somebody out there with extra equipment, right, to validate the flow rate or gauge levels of the river. Those things that your agency and other agencies are publishing sometimes, every 15 minutes, right? And
Right.
Very granular data that you work hard to make publicly available. We use a lot of that data, to help people assess, transportation conditions, transportation risks, those sorts of things from, situational awareness and planning, combining with some of the other data that we have. So we're huge users of that data and really huge fans of the value that transparency brings.
Now, can I ask you, gentlemen, I understand the Corps is updating and modernizing a lot of the forms in which it puts out the information. It has to struggle sometimes with the legacy software, and sort of information in a form that may not be the most easily accessible, like certain spreadsheets and stuff. But you guys are working with new formats and new types of software and making videos, right? Isn't that correct?
Yes, definitely. That's a constant thing. It's always changing to try to, make it the new technologies, improvements. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways that we publish that data, both where people can pull it down digitally, where they can see it, graphs and things like that. And then we have, publications that we're putting out to showing that. But yeah, that's always something we're constantly improving as technology improves. We do that. And like Susan said, we have a tremendous network of gauges, of rain gauges, of river gauges. We take physical discharges to calibrate those constantly. And we work with the USGS. USGS has some of them. National Weather Service has some of them. We have an inventory of them, but we all make sure that they're talking. We can pull the data from it. And it's just amazing the amount of data that we have. And we need that to make decisions on the river and operations. And again, all that data is publicly available. But we try to, it can be difficult to dig into the data if you're not what you're looking at. But like you said, we had different products where we can make that data where, somebody that's not used to looking at that data, it can make sense of it.
Well, it does seem like there's a little bit of effort involved among the people who want the real information. And I guess the reason this comes up is that there are a lot of people out there who'd rather listen to a talking head tell them what they want to hear than do any looking for themselves.
Right.
Well, and to add to, to what Joey's talking about, that, in additional efforts of transparency, we also, all of our surveys, we upload on the internet for the navigation industry to be able to look at, certain reaches of the river, the known, areas, or known trouble spots that we have in low water, and we put those surveys out, and and they can go out and look at them. The navigation interest can go look at those areas, to see what the water's like on a certain day.
And those are that's pretty complex technology, like the bathymetry and those sorts of things that go into, the surveys that you all produce. I think, to David's point, you all have a ton of data, but in terms of, people writing about those things or publishing them on the web, which is generally where people go, right, when they want to get information, it's a pretty narrow group of organizations that have that data. I think one of the things that we were thinking about is that when you go to search something like that, because there is such a narrow set of experts in the field, that it's maybe easier for search engines to pick up on things like the video, right, that aren't true but have gotten circulation, have gotten views, and that kind of triggers the ability for those things to start coming up, onto somebody's web search before you have to get down across the fold. So that's just an observation. I don't think there's anything that that necessarily to change that, but it's just something that is a fact of the matter. It's because we're not talking about some coin or something like that lots of people search, and there's lots of research and publications on that. It's makes it a little bit easier for something like this to sneak in.
Well, I this leads us to talk about search too, because I've seen studies that the behavior of people online is changing, and where they might have used search terms themselves with Google, now they're just going to an AI and asking it a question and let the AI do all the work of scouring the internet, good, bad, or indifferent information that may be out there. And you may have had the experience of asking AI a question and getting a wrong answer, and then you correct it and it says, oh yes, you're right.
Yeah, actually, one of our stakeholders just, shared with us the other day on a call that, he had done a search on, the number of states that, that are affected, within the Mississippi Valley, that, and it returned the right number, but it was talking about a couple other areas that, nowhere near, impacted by the Mississippi River or the Mississippi River Basin. So, right.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting, but he gave them the right number, just gave them all the wrong names.
Yeah.
So on this topic here on low water, I think it's, it's an opportunity for somebody to put a message out. Oh, we lost John for a second. Anyway, because, we're in a somewhat of unique, that we've had low water, 3 or 4 years in a row now. And so people are questioning, why is this, the new norm? Will it be like this going forward? And so there's an opportunity there to send whatever message you want because it's tough to understand. But anyway, what we've tried to do to show that is to explain, yes, we are in a low water, but, just look back to 15 to 20, we were in a very wet period. And we explain, try to explain that if we look back, we've got 120, 130 years of what we would say reliable data. And it's a cyclic pattern. Through that time, we have been through dry periods and we have been through wet periods. And so, yeah, looking at the 10 or 20 past years, it looks very unique. But the fact is that, as long as we've been measuring the river, we have had high and low periods that are a result of the rainfall and not annual rainfall, but rainfall when it matters, when we're in our normal low water, and then we don't get, an adequate rain, then we go lower than normal. And so it matters when the range is. And so the last 3 or 4 years, we have been dry. That time period, it's easily seen when you look at the rain data. The rain data directly correlates with the low river stages. But if you didn't know that, it's easy to wonder, what is causing that? Is there some kind of difference happening? Is there some kind of different operations? And those questions are out. And so anyway, I think it's important for us to get our message out and to explain why, so people understand that, because it's obvious when you can lay the data out. So.
And Susan, you were able to find some tells or features in this that made it identifiable, but aren't some AI experts saying that the tools are getting so sophisticated that pretty soon it'll be beyond a human's ability to spot the tells? They can put in all kinds of stammers and eye blinks and things that make the AIs look real or sound real.
I think, I was just, with a group of waterways experts up in DC doing some work on the Hill. And, while we were in breaks between our meetings, we were talking about, this video and deepfakes in particular, and saying how awesome it would be to be able to have a piece of software that would automatically tell you the probability that something has been generated by AI, like a little dial, like a, cold, hot sort of thing. But to your point, David, I mean, I spent my whole career in technology, and I've yet to see anything accelerate as fast as what generative AI technology has done in the last few years. And I think it just makes it very hard to predict where the puck is going, from a adaptation standpoint. So I think people for different reasons will always be making AI videos look more and sound more realistic, using more and more advanced tools. So tools that are made to detect those sort of things are going to have to follow that to be effective, right, in telling us those sort of things. I've talked to WMOS, and I'm a member of WMOS, the Women in Maritime Ops, and talked to some of their team there, and we're going to do another video, I think, coming up for the general population. But one of the things people talk about, trust and verify. I tell people with AI, don't trust and verify, right? Always verify, what AI is giving you back, because it's at the heart of everything. It's a probability model. It's, maybe 90% of the time it's going to give you the same answer and the correct factual answer, but at the tails of that probability curve are other scenarios that it's picking up. And so I think just general recognition of how we use the tools and making sure that as people we're verifying, what these tools are giving us is really crucial to maintaining integrity and work and using the tools at the same time.
And Susan, you used a very important word there, which is trust, which to me, I'm not going to be so arrogant as to believe that I'm going to be able to spot the AI fakes as they get more sophisticated, but I do know what the trusted sources are, and the Corps of Engineers is one of them, which leads us, and I hope the Waterways Journal is too for our listeners. We've been around since 1887, but so far I've avoided asking about what the motivations for a video like this might be that raises all these fake questions about the Mississippi River. Is it just to get eyeballs and revenue, or is it to undermine trust in established authorities? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it may be a little bit of everything you just said. I think the clicks is something, the more people view it, the more clicks and the more advertisements. And, just this particular one, just kind of looking into other videos that this forum made, they've made tremendous amount of videos, and it's all sensationalized. And so I think it's a big part of it's about clicks. That would be one of my guesses, I guess.
That's probably about the only thing we can come up with is, don't really know any other nefarious reason why they would do it other than clicks and, and revenue, but pulling in revenue from the number of clicks.
Yeah, and
getting sponsors.
Yeah, and it kind of, the underlying message is that, it wasn't the the rain was there and we still had low water. And so that kind of lends to, okay, somebody's doing something wrong, mismanagement of the river or something like that, and sensationalizing that. I kind of took that from it too, you know, so.
And when you can appeal slightly to people's sensibilities, right? Like you can start to get that glimmer of, you know, people start to think, oh, well, that could make sense, right? Like,
Right.
But it doesn't. It's not what's actually happening. So I'm taking that truth and, you know, spinning it, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, you know, just recently becoming an influencer or doing social media that gets clicks can become someone's job, right? Like they can make a living off of doing these sorts of things. And, you know, I think that there are people that don't care what the content is. You know, they're just looking for the things that will get the most interest, you know, regardless of kind of what the impact might be on distributing, you know, kind of that kind of information. So I think I mean, in the global world of topics, I think it's a, you know, incredibly important topic, but also again that there's a smaller universe of people that understand, you know, what's going on with the river. I think like you could train an AI agent to go and say, create a sensational story about something that's geological. It's going to go find topics. And I think it would be very reasonable for it to find this topic, because especially like in 2022, there were a lot of news publications, you know, when the kind of the transition of the period that you all were talking about kind of between 2020 and 2022, you know, you could find a lot of publications on that, and that could have been the route that the AI agent then took hold of and then fabricated this elaborate story by pulling in those pieces of information.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we just have to be smart about which fire hose we're drinking from. I mean, I go on YouTube and I see those videos that are obviously fake, like, you know, top 10 highways, you know, with the highway leaping out into space in a way that defies the laws of physics. But they're still online. They still get views, so somebody must buy them.
Right. Biggest one I've noticed lately is like if you watch shows, you know, waiting for the next season. Me and my wife watch, you know, whatever shows, they have AI generated it. The show starts, the next season starts next week, and it's false, but you click on it to see. So they got you. And they're going to start the show back up the next season. No, it's still 2 years away.
Yeah, some AIs, their time sense is a little off. I saw a question about Bad Bunny's Super Bowl performance, and they got an AI answer that used the past tense as if it was had already happened when the Super Bowl is until this Sunday. So is there anything else about the Mississippi River that you guys want to assure our visitors and viewers about? That, I mean, you have all the data, you keep track of it all, you don't lose any water, you know where everything is. We have more data than most people can process even.
Right.
And it's very granular, as Susan said, very granular, very accurate. When people, if people want to do the work, what's the best thing for them to do? Where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, so like you know, the Mississippi River and all of rivers, but specific, you know, really the Mississippi River, we're collecting so much data and analyzing it. And, you know, not just the Corps, the Weather Service, the USGS, you know, states. It's just a huge collaborative effort to manage this huge resource. And it's important, and it's just amazing the amount of effort that goes into it. And so we're tracking a lot, you know, it's being measured. And so, you know, we have our eyes on it. So that's it. To get information about the river, those are great resources. I mean, we have, like I said, we collect a lot of data, the National Weather Service, all those are just great resources. But it is definitely has its eye. You know, everybody's watching what the Mississippi River is doing and managing it as most efficiently as possible.
Yeah, and I guess you asked what I'd like for everybody to know is that, up and down the river, and throughout the country, but specifically, within the Ohio Valley, Mississippi Valley, we've got, just numerous experts, both in what Joey does with the water management piece, and then also in the operations piece, operating our locks and dams, our dredgers out, dredging and opening up the river, keeping it open for navigation to continue to move, and also the surveyors that are out there up and down the river constantly, checking and making sure, and then also keeping that open communication with the navigation industry, those folks that know the river better than anybody else. And we're constantly in contact with them, communicating, getting information and sharing information.
Well, Susan, Pat, and Joey, thank you so much for joining us. I think you've answered a lot of people's questions, and I hope they come here and watch our videos first before they look at random things on YouTube. And we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.